Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 23rd. I knew it was going to be Wednesday eventually. Yesterday, I thought it was Wednesday. It was Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. I know you're on the edge of your seat. Wait a minute. What year is it? Well, okay. 2024. I thought I would bring you that news. Stay tuned for traffic and weather after this. Another big day, 24 hours. That's how long it lasts. They're huge these days. Tremendous. And lots of news happens in them. And, of course, today we'll have the assistance of Greg Dworkin to help us sort through some of the news, although it will be news that happened yesterday. Because the news that's happening today, well, that's the subject of tomorrow's show. Or the subject of discussion on social media later this afternoon, when it happens. We can try predicting the news. Donald Trump will be a fascist and love Hitler. Donald Trump will threaten to deport some crazy number of tens of millions of people from this country, regardless of their immigration status. And I guess then we'll be stuck because of the enormity of the moral crime involved. We'll instead involve ourselves with the facts and figures, the logistics and costs of that kind of deportation, as opposed to, well, you know, how do you even grapple with whether or not it should happen? And what would be the point? You could tell Donald Trump not to do it, and that would more or less guarantee that he would do it. Okay. Well, we've got a lot to round up, as usual, and one of the things that I can round... Well, you know what? One of the things I can start out with is actually housekeeping matters, which will give me a chance to take care of a few issues. First being, where can I find this thing? I keep getting emails urgently from Patreon, which tell me something that about the, I mean, it's not that hard to understand. It's just, I don't want to understand it very much, and so I'm not paying a great deal of attention to it. And I think, if I read the explanation correctly, it won't affect any of those of you who are already sponsors on Patreon. So go back to sleep, I guess. However, those of you who are contemplating joining, it probably won't make a big difference for you either. But I am urged by Patreon to remind everybody that Apple, the big evil corporation, is requiring Patreon to move over to Apple's in-app purchase system in order for the Patreon app to remain available in the App Store. So maybe a little antitrust case you could bring there. But no matter at this point, it really won't affect you. But you're currently, that is to say, I am currently on the first of the month billing model, which means that Apple does not support your billing model, my billing model, and I need to switch to subscription billing, which I don't really understand which is. I thought that we were on a system where, but well, I guess what's happening is, you used to get billed on the first of the month for your monthly subscription and support, and now they're going to change it, although they won't change it for people who've already subscribed, for whatever reason. It used to be that they will, if you subscribed on the 15th of the month, you would be billed on the first of the next month, I guess, and now they're just going to start billing you right away. That sounds pretty Apple-ish. And then they'll bill you on the 15th of each month, or whatever date you signed up on. So you'll want to sign up on the 31st, and they'll only bill you a couple of months a year, right? Isn't that how it would work? No, not exactly. But I guess the news is anyone who signs up now will be on this new subscription model, and anyone who has already subscribed, it stays the same for a while until they eventually try to force everybody into something. I don't know why it would make any sense to force anybody off that model. Now you just assume, for the sake of the subscription model, that everybody subscribed on the first and everybody's happy. I don't know. They're very intent that I tell you this so that there are no surprises. It will only be a surprise to those of you who are only just joining Patreon, though. So I urge you to be one of those people. But among those people, there are also those who are already members who have, of late, boosted their support for the show. And we want to thank Michelle Roberts and Pete Ketchbull. Hi, Pete. And Michelle for joining in the inexorable march toward world domination by KITM, I guess, and helping us out just a little bit extra. And it's a tough period in which to do that. It's, well, I don't know. Taxes, I guess, are looming. People have to start preparing for that. But also the election, where you could and maybe even should be spending all of your money. But a couple of bucks here and there won't make a great deal of difference. But do pitch in the election. Do pitch in supporting the show. Do pitch in supporting Netroots Radio, which you can support in many of the same ways, including Patreon, I believe. But certainly direct donations. All the information you'll need is, of course, on the Netroots Nation webpage, and you can find it at, are we a .org? I don't even know. I'm not even a we, really. But let's go find out. But I do believe that they have a Patreon account as well. And I should get this straight before I head into something like this. But I only intended to come in and tell you about the restructuring of the Patreon payment system to the extent that it will matter to you, and to thank the people who have joined in with additional funds. That takes care of the housekeeping portion of today's show. Greg Dworkin is here. I suspect he called in immediately to tell me that Aileen Cannon is in danger of becoming the Attorney General of the United States. Is that what is top on your mind today, Greg?
Not top, but certainly noticed it.
It's there, yeah. Scott sent me I saw that yesterday, and Scott sent me an entry about that as well. Now, I don't know how seriously they're taking it, but if you thought Harriet Myers was a bad idea, this is worse.
But the thing is, when you see somebody on a list like that, what happened is the campaign leaked that she was on the short list for Attorney General. Yes. Basically, what it is a message to that person fluffing you up.
Yeah.
So perhaps the message is, keep blocking stuff for me because we like you.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything else she has the opportunity to block, but no, it doesn't. But I will say this. Trump is extraordinarily dumb about this sort of thing. And ordinarily I would say, oh yeah, this is just somebody trying to make somebody else believe that they're still important. But Trump may not know any other judges by name, and he might not know this one. So I don't know. It's out there. It's a danger, but I think probably the bigger danger. Like if you are, he likes Hitler, and I'm okay with that, but he also likes Aileen Cannon. If there is such a person,
Liz Mayer,
I'd like to meet them.
Who is a never Trumper, but sort of like a not fully committed one. I mean, she gets her jollies by dumping on the left as much as possible while being a never Trumper. So she wrote yesterday, "This strikes me as much bigger news than the Hitler's generals comment being discussed." If this is true, and it's not just a member of Trump's team freelancing this, it looks like a pretty transparent attempt to buy off Cannon with a cabinet nomination. But then she adds, of course, if it's not true, or if it is a member of Trump's team freelancing, it's just another reminder this guy hires a lot of people who are, shall we say, from the dregs of the political firmament and have no business advising a former or future president.
There is that.
She's right about that.
Yes, I think that's a fair enough point, even if it was weirdly arrived at. But yeah, definitely true. You don't want anybody like this advising him. You don't want him accepting the advice. But yeah, I don't know what to tell you. It's maybe as much a scare tactic or a trolling tactic as anything else. But I don't know. I was never on the verge of voting for him anyway, and this just confirms how much dumber he is than most people think, I guess.
The thing is, to him, winning means winning a news cycle, and winning a news cycle means getting your name in the news, whether it's good or bad.
True.
So if he drops something like this and you talk about it, he wins in his mind.
Right.
Only in his mind. But, that's sort of a segue into sort of an important topic, I think, is an important topic that I want to talk about today.
All right.
And that is the media narrative versus the polls versus the actual vote, which we don't know.
I stopped paying attention to the polls on your advice.
Yes. And I'll give you an example of why.
I didn't know
also what it means for the media.
All right.
That's the important part, not so much what the polls say. I mean, the polls are pretty consistent. Harris has got a 3 to 4 point lead in 3 or 4 of the national polls that came out in the last 24 hours. There is a TIP, TIPP, tracking poll. It's now on day 10. It had Harris with a 4-point lead. Then it flipped to a Trump 2-point lead. Now it's back to a Harris 1-point lead. I sent you a graph of how they were doing. It's sort of right at the top. You have a donkey and an elephant running a race, and there's your graph just underneath.
Yeah, what a nice cartoon.
Yes, and, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever for the change in status, for the flip, for the 6-point swing. Just nothing happened to justify it whatsoever. And that gives you an idea of how volatile tracking polls in particular are. And that's why Gallup stopped doing them.
Oh. I did not even realize
they don't
that,
tell you what you want to know.
Oh. Well, they never tell me what I want to know. When is Trump going to jail?
Right. Or
no
who's
poll
win.
can tell me
might be
that.
Another question you might ask them. They can't tell you.
Well, as long as no one can tell me the answer, what's the difference what the question was?
So this is an interesting newsletter from Nate Cohen, and he writes up 2 theories for why the polls failed in 2020 and what it means for 2024. His point being, if you want to accurately figure out whether the polls are good or not good, or whether they tell you what you need to know in 2024, you have to go back to 2016 and 2020 and figure out why they failed then. Because you can't fix it if you don't know what the problem is.
Yeah. Well, this doesn't sound good for polling. All right.
Well, it's an interesting approach.
His never
general
this right.
Unified theory consensus thing is, look, everybody's come to the conclusion, which may be right, which may not be right, that polls just don't pick up voters who are least politically engaged. The ones that overwhelmingly back Trump but usually don't vote. And when they do, they surprise you because the polls didn't pick them up.
Yeah. Or if they did pick them up, they threw them out.
So goes the theory.
Yes.
Okay. And so the pollsters adjusted for education. They adjusted for all sorts of things. And they figured they got it right in 2020 because now we're not going to ignore all of those diners in West Virginia. And the 2020 polls were off too.
Oh, yes. All right. So
now, one theory is the polls are always off because they can never pick up the people who are not that interested in politics because they don't answer polls. So you can't fix it. And the polls, therefore, always underestimate Trump, and so beware. That's theory 1.
All right.
Theory 2 is, and that's just a fancy way of saying the polls are going to be wrong, but we don't know which direction. This would be the argument for why it's wrong in favor of Trump.
Yes.
The other theory, though, which there's even more data to support, is really kind of interesting, and he calls it the patchwork theory, but ultimately the pandemic. Okay, there's a lot of different things that may have gone wrong in 2020, but maybe what happened is that they were fixed, that the pollsters did a great job in 2020, and they adjusted all the stuff. They got the, low-intensity voters that they had missed in 2016. They made the adjustments for education. They did everything right. Then the pandemic came. And the pandemic just spoiled everything.
Okay.
A lot of people stayed home. They weren't at work. They had more time. They answered polls. It was disproportionately Democratic.
Yeah,
and so, the polls were sort of set up for normal, and 2020 wasn't normal. And so, they didn't exactly get it.
Okay.
Right?
So now that's 2 excuses in a row.
The 2016 election also featured an unusual number of undecided voters and voters backing third-party candidates. A lot of them didn't decide until late. James Comey, 10 days before the election.
They didn't poll that guy, I bet.
And they didn't really, account for what happened after that. So that's what happened in 2016. Now, there aren't that many undecided left.
Yes.
So that shouldn't be the big issue that it was in 2016. So maybe the polls are more or less right now because it isn't a pandemic, and the adjustments they made in 2020 for missing in 2016 actually were good, and so they're accurate, and so Harris really is ahead.
That could be, right. They thought they got it right, but the experiment was contaminated by the virus.
Pandemic, and now that the pandemic isn't there, the experiment will continue to show that, yeah, they got it right. So those are the two competing theories, and they're both interesting. And so that would explain how the polls could be wrong, but in favor of Harris.
Yes. How could they be wrong in favor of Jill Stein?
They can't.
No. All right.
So Matt Grossman,
well,
political scientist, and I didn't put this on the list, but I'll give it to you now.
All right. Well, now it's on the list.
So you could find it.
It has a little cartoon of Matt Grossman.
Notes that polling errors are normally much larger than current swing state margins and in the same direction across states. So if they match 2020, Trump's ahead. And if they match 2022, Harris is ahead.
Well, then, I hope they match 2022.
We all do. And okay. A lot of things look like 2022 rather than 2020. So, that's what's going on. So those are the look at the polls. Harris ahead, but are the polls correct? And so, those are sort of important discussions that nonetheless you can't determine until after the election in terms of which theory was closer to the truth and what's really going on with the polls.
Why don't we just go there then?
That doesn't stop the media from writing their narrative. And since it's not based on the polls, it can't be, because the polls don't tell you who's ahead.
Right.
They write a narrative.
Well, they try, but they don't.
For example, here's CNN featuring a picture of Harry Enten.
Really?
A jittery Harris campaign makes big plans to clinch a narrow win.
All right.
Did they need to put in the word jittery? Is that important? Is that in the article? Not really.
No, okay.
That's their narrative. That is their editorial decision. And the point is that when the polls are that close and you have nothing else, this is what you do. Kristen Soltis Anderson, who's a Republican pollster, noted a piece about this by Greg Sargent, and she pulled this clip from it. And Greg Sargent basically argues that, look, including red wave style polls like Trafalgar and Atlas Intel don't really change the averages all that much, maybe by a half a point. But that matters, not because of how it affects the averages, but how it affects the media. And she pulls out this statement from Greg Sargent. It would be extremely helpful if media figures stopped letting small data shifts set whole media narratives. That's what I mean about the piece I read you from CNN. That goes for partisans as well. When a state poll shifts from 0.3 to Harris to 0.3 for Trump, there is no reason for Democrats to panic, just as a shift in the other direction is no reason to celebrate. It's all within the margin of error. Margin of effort, as Ben Wickler likes to call it. The data is simply too imprecise to tell us anything meaningful at this level of granularity. Kristen Soltis Anderson pulls this and says, this is my fight song. Stop asking the polls to tell you who's going to win. They can't.
Okay.
They can't tell you if sentiment is shifting. According to the polls, it's not. See the tip tracker, for example. See the +3, +4 Harris leads in the other polls. Today's Wednesday, there'll be a Marquette poll of Wisconsin this afternoon. That'll be fun to watch. But things are close, and basically that's what the polls are telling us. And that's one of the reasons why getting past the headline, the CNN article was so interesting, because they talked to the Harris campaign about this.
All right.
David Plouffe, who's the campaign manager, he's called the senior advisor to Harris so that the Biden people can still have their titles, but he's the campaign manager.
I see. I did not even realize that was going on, but okay.
He was brought in to help manage the campaign as a senior advisor.
Sure.
And he's the one doing all the talking to the media. Historically, it would be unusual to have 7 states come down to a point or less, but I think at this point you have to assume that's a possibility. Plouffe and other Harris advisors do not believe Trump's largely outsourced door-knocking and other on-the-ground outreach operations can match what the National Democrats can do.
All right.
But they believe the advantage can only take them so far. So what Plouffe said is Democrats wish Donald Trump wouldn't get more than 46% of the vote, but in the battleground states he's going to. He's going to get 48. We have to make sure we get 49.5 to 50. That's our job.
Well, yes.
And
we're
so
going to score
Bluff
one more
and
than you.
the Harris camp think that the vice president still has room to go, which is a fancy way of saying late deciders going to break for her. As the polls suggest, Emerson says that's what's likely.
All right.
Okay.
We'll believe that? Sure.
So, yeah. So as Harris aides are on a frantic chase to find disengaged voters, everybody's on a frantic chase. It's an election and it's close.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to throw that in to make it sound like the Democrats are nervous. Much of that outreach will come in the form of campaign tactics that are new to presidential campaigns, and some rely on new technology.
Do they? All right.
Right? So,
Maybe.
you know, the new apps on the phone that are going to help find people, going on the podcast, talking to,
weirdos.
Rogan, for example, which
Right.
Trump is going to do this week.
Sure. He should challenge them to lift weights together.
Right.
Yeah.
And while several top Democratic operatives said they were, Harris may be losing the traditional TV ad wars.
Are they? Really? I don't think so.
Because the Republicans extensively are using transgender issues as their closing argument. They can't do the economy because the economy got better. Just pretty much neutralized them on immigration, so they're doing transgender.
Well, it's not the transgender, stupid. They don't usually
Most of the
say
upper
that.
class voters say Harris voters aren't paying attention to these ads if they're watching TV at all. You've heard that from me.
Yeah.
Watch TV. Who cares how much they spend on TV?
That
And
is
the campaign
an issue.
believes it has the edge over Trump's operation thanks to months of precinct-by-precinct organizing and planning that's constantly being adjusted based on early vote and online data.
Right.
So all through the summer, that's what they were planning for a stable race. There'll be one on the margins, and that's what they have now.
That's why my phone rings all day.
So after months of carefully poll testing well-known non-politicians, campaign will roll out more endorsements, interviews, and appearances meant to break through to tuned-out voters. That's why M&M is doing the Detroit conference. Yeah, they'll have Obama and Springsteen traditionally do the Philadelphia conference at the end, you know.
Yeah, but they don't rhyme.
That's why you have Julia Roberts going to Georgia. That's why you have Harris on Charlemagne the God. So we're not throwing spaghetti against the wall. Each of these is planned. It's not frantic. It's not desperate. It's the plan.
Yeah. Unless they need the Chef Boyardee vote, in which case.
And whereas
spaghetti.
Trump's going to go in all in on transgender,
Yes.
Harris is going to go in on reproductive rights and Harris's biography and economic plans. That
Okay,
is
very
her
traditional.
closing argument.
Usually the sorts of things that Americans consider when voting for president. I have data on this.
So, interestingly, then they go over this and then they talk about, well, what about, using Liz Cheney and other people to try to get the disaffected Republicans, which has made some Democrats unhappy. But actually, it's made disaffected Republicans very happy.
Okay.
I mean, let me just tell you some anecdotes of people who keep writing me and saying, I got somebody I work with who's a traditional Republican who told me they're voting for Harris, and I was shocked.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I understand why people are upset about it, but I think it's just the sort of thing that they used to fret about on their own because no one really wanted to talk to them about it because it's kind of a silly worry. But now on social media, you can make everybody listen anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's like, why aren't you paying attention to my issues? Why are you listening to them?
Yeah. I mean,
And the answer is they already have your vote. They need their vote.
Yeah. Well, but they already have mine. So I don't need to listen to you. I knew that Liz Cheney had endorsed when I cast my ballot, but I cast my ballot for her nonetheless.
Right.
And I didn't have anything to say at the ballot box about Liz Cheney, so I just didn't.
Right. So in Pennsylvania, where the Harris campaign's focus on Republicans has been highest, Pittsburgh area Representative Chris DeLuzio told CNN after rallying veterans at a campaign office
Come on over to the office.
that he believes these voters will be won over in the end. What we're going to see in November is some traditional Republicans, independents, who might lean that way, not willing to embrace a guy like Trump, who calls these January 6 people who were convicted political prisoners. They're willing to do the patriotic thing and keep our government together and strong, even if there are some policy differences. Harris advisors are not counting on these silent majority voters coming over to the vice president without more efforts to convince them. And, the message here, and I'll get to some of Dana Hull's analysis of this article after the break. The campaign's numbers showing past the victory, Pluff said, do not rely on these voters.
Well, no.
They want them.
Hope.
But they don't rely on them.
Yeah, but
what he's hoping, and he says it in the article, he left open the possibility they could help deliver a bigger win than public or internal campaign polls are showing so far. I'm confident that we're being conservative in how we view this race so that we're more likely to be surprised by the upside of things. End of article. Point being, they're fairly confident they see a path to win, and they're actually now making some moves to make it a bigger win. Which is not the same thing as, why are they frantically going to Kentucky looking for votes? Tim Walsh is going.
Yeah.
Why are they frantically going to Houston to look for votes? Harris is going there because she's going to make abortion rights a centerpiece because Texas is ground zero.
Yes. And she's going there because there's a crucial Senate contest.
Yeah, there's Cruz in all red, and that might help a little bit.
Sure.
But, her campaign is about her. And she's going there because she thinks that, you get sick and tired of, media message about swing states close, this, that, swing states, swing. And she wants to break through and get to a bigger message. And this is one way to do it. In fact, there aren't that many opportunities now. So that's why she's doing that.
All right. I think
it's not a mistake.
It makes a headline, right? In Texas.
That's what she wants. She wants the headline.
Yes, that's true. And
she thinks it'll be a more important headline than the one that Trump gets for, cosplaying at McDonald's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I would hope so. All right. It makes sense. I think I understand the thing. He's not counting on these voters. Okay, fine. But would we want to gather them up? Yeah, sure. Okay. Well,
we will welcome their votes.
Yeah, and I will take a 2% win instead of a 1%. Sure, why not? Why wouldn't I not work for that?
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us, coming around the outside and passing Seattle Slough. All right, well, I don't know.
Here we go down the stretch.
Yeah.
No way.
Seattle Slough. I'm very Trump-brained there. Seattle Slough is the greatest racehorse of all time.
Right.
That's a very 80s thing to believe. All right.
So we have a mutual friend. His name is Dana Hull. He's served in various capacities, including campaign manager for congressman, winning congressman. Jim Himes, for example. He managed winning campaigns on issues. He was chief of staff in Congress for Paul Hodes. So he's got some, political chops there. And I think he's a pretty sharp analyst. And he took a look at that Plouffe article, and I want to go over what he said because I thought it was really interesting.
All right.
So rather than put jittery in the title, okay, Dana says, read this article closely, especially what Plouffe says. My take?
All right.
1, they think she's ahead. 2, they don't believe the public polls that have the battlegrounds all within 2 points. They think some are in the bag at least. 3, they don't need Republican votes to win. 4, going after Republicans and doing a bunch of outreach in unorthodox places isn't as much to squeak out a win as it is to run up the score. They trust their data more than their polling. And their internal presentations of where the campaign is and where it's headed must be pretty good because you don't hear the big donors squawking. And they usually freak out about everything.
That's true. There is a voice that you forget every year that usually they freak out and start screaming about something. And
then they write
missing
about how you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, and that's true. And then when they're missing, you don't really notice it because every time they do squawk, you're like, what are they even doing here?
Right. I mean, it doesn't change anything, but it's just, he's right. And, that's where you get campaign experience. The donors are happy. Well,
right.
I guess the presentations are good, even though I haven't heard them.
Yeah. All right.
So, to me, he says, it's not like they know they have it won. That's not what he's saying. But they know if they execute the plan that they will win. And it's a balance. You want donors to feel confident it's a good investment, but you need their money. So you can't make it sound like you already won.
Yes.
Right? State X is winnable, but that campaign needs volunteers to close the deal. Give us money. That kind of thing.
Right. Sure. Well, it's
true.
So
that leads to a different piece that I'm going to follow up with. But then he goes on to say a few more thoughts about this. A close election helps Trump and potentially SCOTUS steal it. So if it's a big win, it's harder. And election night matters.
Yes,
Trump will allege Democrats are dumping a bunch of fake votes, but if we win marginal Republican areas, that could speed the process of the networks calling it in places like Michigan and Wisconsin. Take Pennsylvania.
Please.
Right? The fastest county to count votes in Pennsylvania is going to be Allegheny.
Yes. Okay. Why?
Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Because they have it together, and they have a system whereby they're going to do this. And the reason Allegheny County and not Pittsburgh itself is important is because if Harris wins Allegheny County by 60% or more, it means that she's winning the suburbs.
Okay.
If she wins the suburbs, she's going to win the state. So you get an idea of where the race is at really early by looking at Allegheny, which reports relatively early. So by 9 or 10 o'clock, let's say 10 o'clock on Tuesday night, 2 weeks from now, looking at Pennsylvania and listening to the Allegheny vote, you'll have a pretty good idea who won Pennsylvania.
Okay. That will
Even though Pennsylvania's going to take at least until the next day to finish counting.
2 weeks from today minus about 8 hours.
Yeah, more or less.
Okay.
But who's counting? So, all of that is
they are,
is important.
and very quickly. That's the good news. All right. And, of course, should she win Allegheny County, Donald Trump will immediately say, see, that's a county I should normally win. That's why this is all being stolen from me. It's all rigged. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the election stealers.
Yep, that's what he's going to say.
Yeah.
Stealers. We all know about Pittsburgh Steelers.
Right.
Dave McCormick, the Republican nominee for Senate, knows all about the Pittsburgh Steelers because he goes to Philadelphia Eagles games.
Yes.
And doesn't know where he is. So Dana says, I don't know why Walz is going to Kentucky, but it just occurred to me that Kentucky is typically one of the first states called on election night. I think their polls close at 7 as opposed to everybody else closing at 8.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if that's the plan, but it would be a good
reason.
So
maybe Walz is going there to juice turnout in a Democratic bastion and slow down the call for Kentucky. I don't know. That could be completely wrong, he said, but I suspect the Harris team has spent time thinking about how reporting beginning at 7 p.m. will affect the receptiveness of the press. And his overall point is, unfortunately, in 2024, you have to think about those things.
Yeah. Well, true. Kentucky. All right.
And he says, most of the stuff wasn't even thought about prior to 2000. And 2020 showed what happened after the polls closed can influence whether we remain a democracy. So winning's obviously the most important thing. But how it's announced and how it's perceived matters too. That's why I go back to what we were saying with Greg Sargent talking about the flooding the polls with red wave polls.
Yes.
They don't change the average, but they change the narrative. And the narrative is important because it's important in regard to who accepts the results.
Yes. Adam, it's a evil genius kind of strategy. You don't have to, well, one, you don't have to actually do the polls. You could just fake them. But two, even if the aggregators ignore them or outright say these are crap polls and we're not going to include them, then you say, see, they're rigging it, in favor of the Democrats. They're biased against Republicans. So there's an opportunity to make accusations. Or if they take your poll and figure it in, then you say, look, momentum. So win-win for them in terms of narrative seizing. But I don't know. We've done a pretty good job, I think, so far. And there's still work to be done because people still get panicky about these things. And to a certain extent, that's just sort of built in to the psyche of Democrats. But I think we've done a pretty good job preparing everybody for the fact that they do this. And people who are real serious poll watchers know that it's coming. And they've written about it. So it's good. But yeah, no one will ever get used to entirely. I've seen news and I have to factor it out because it's crap. That's right. Still hard.
So this piece is from an interesting guy who I follow and didn't really make the connection until recently. His name is Patrick Dillon.
Yes.
He's a former Obama guy. And, he has some pretty sharp election analysis on Twitter, which is why I follow him.
Yes.
And then he wrote a one-off. He doesn't usually write these pieces, but in Substack, he wrote a one-off piece called This, We're Going to Be Okay. This is a one-off. I'm not starting a Substack. I just want to write this one piece.
All right. Sure.
Okay. That's cool. And so I clicked on his bio.
Yeah.
And he said, he's a big fan of Jen O'Malley, Dylan.
Okay. All right.
Said, oh, well, they're married and have 3 kids. That's
well, I mean,
I didn't know that.
Fan, is that what it means? Okay. Yeah. Really? Is that what the kids are calling it these days?
That's what the kids are calling it these days. So my texts are full these days of, are we going to be okay? And then a beat later, are you really sure? And if I say yes, and as sure as I can be, then people still ask.
Well.
Because we're Democrats.
Yeah.
I also used to get paid to make big presentations this time of year to tell clients what's going on and what might happen. That process forced me to be rigorous in assessing every bit of data I could lay my hands on and keep myself honest. That said, I'm not a Nate fan, not Silver, not Cohen.
Who?
I still believe at the end of the campaign, at the end of the day, campaigns are more art than science.
Sure.
So it's 51% gut and 49% data.
Okay. It should be the other way around.
Okay. And I believe the pool of modern, comparable presidential elections is such a small sample. Each is, in its own world, from which we may draw lessons, but not much in the way of hard and fast rules. Mm-hmm. That's important when you look at the early vote and you try to compare it to 2020, which was a pandemic year.
Right.
Democrat vote is down. Well, of course it's down. It was supposed to be down. Everybody expected it to be down. It's down. Oh, I got to write a story about how it's down compared to 2020. Why?
I don't know. What else am I going to do?
We told you it was going to be down. So, to save some time and in the spirit of to hell with it, here in one place is what data and my gut tell me I believe. She will win. She will outperform the polls. Trump will be rejected.
Right.
His campaign's relentless focus on anti-trans ads, he noticed same thing we noticed, will come to be seen as an epic strategic blunder in addition to unforgivably morally repugnant. But again, you got to separate the morally repugnant with strategic blunder.
Okay.
And this happens all the time. We have 2 weeks from now to the election. And whereas, and people who listen to this show a long time will understand, you will, you listen to the show for a long time.
It is on in the background of my life.
So basically, you could spend a year, 3.5 years, 3 years and 11 months if you want.
All right.
Talking about what's morally repugnant.
Oh, I do
And in the last 2 weeks coming to the election, I just want to know, how does it affect the vote and who's going to win?
Yes. I tend to stick with the repugnant.
It isn't morally repugnant, but if that's the only story you have, Trump shouldn't be quoting Hitler. I get that. How is that going to affect the vote?
Yes.
Because you start to get really, locked in and focused with 2 weeks before the election. And, of course, the election's going on now. Millions of people have already voted.
Yes.
So we'll acknowledge, Dylan writes, that the supposedly disciplined, well-planned campaign to beat Biden never found its footing ever again once a candidate changed. We'll remember his one and only very close win in 2016 came when he was, despite controversy, new, fresh, and funny to his people. He was energetic, went everywhere, was able to at least occasionally give the impression of being in on the joke and enjoying himself. And he didn't say it, but I'll say it. And also James Comey 10 days before the election.
Right.
In 2016, he had an understated strategic ambiguity on what kind of Republican he was. Wink, wink, nod, nod. You're going to see afresh what's been staring at us since 2022. Dobbs was a political earthquake, and if this is too long for you to read, basically everybody underestimates it still.
Okay.
To the extent poll error happens, I believe it's likely to be in her favor than his after 8 years of pollsters obsessively focused on how not to miss Trump supporters. Happy to tell you we covered that in the first part of the show. We are all understandably so traumatized by 2016, and so many were surprised by 2020, though notably not the Biden campaign, that even though there are fairly convincing theories for how each happened, we become hostages of superstition and anxiety. In particular, while his gains with voters of color and young voters are real and need long-term attention, I believe we'll find they're nonetheless meaningfully overstated in polling for a variety of reasons. Recent polls support that. If you have a large group of people looking, let's say, only at Latinos in swing states, that sort of thing, Harris is fine. Oh. If you throw in a crosstab in a national poll that otherwise wasn't really looking at that, it looks like he's gained a lot. He hasn't.
I see.
That's what he's saying.
Okay.
Those groups are hard and getting harder both to poll and to turn out. We'll also find, like Democrats in Virginia in 2021, when we were painfully shown that we could fall even further in the rural reaches, the floor was even lower than we imagined, that Republicans in 2024 actually have further to fall in the suburbs.
Okay. That's possible. If it happens to us.
You talk about your own suburb and how the school movement was horrendously overstated.
Yes.
And it has even less salience now.
Yes. True.
And so maybe your area goes even more blue.
I should hope so. And I think it probably will. There was, I thought, a one-off effort, and again, as I've restated it recently. I forget exactly what the motivation for it was. Now I remember. But yes, it was never actually a winning issue, even in the precinct where the schools involved sat. He lost. It just didn't work here. It was for rural voters and people the furthest. Literally, the physically the furthest removed from this issue and furthest removed from this problem were the ones who panicked the most about it. But it was designed to panic
the ones that panic about the border.
Yes. Also, a place that migrants are just not showing up. Southwestern
because
Virginia.
You're threatening their blood purity. So,
yes, sure, of course.
That's really what's going on here. So, the almost comically latent slapdash, make it up as you go along, build a plane in the air field effort run by people with more money than political or managerial sense, will unsurprisingly fail. He says that.
Yeah, cough, he says.
Will unsurprisingly fail.
Don't edit
one
that
thing
cough.
they admit they very much need, which is getting low-propensity supporters to the voting booth. And it will be substantially outclassed by the massive, well-trained and targeted first Biden, now Harris field operation that's been building on the ground all year.
Yes.
Okay. We will also realize all the rush to analyze early vote returns, to extrapolate to unsupported conclusions, and the independent panics was off base because 2024 isn't 2022, and 2022 wasn't like 2020.
But was it like 2018?
Right. And so he says something that I have said over and over on the air. I call them the Haley to Harris voters. He says for either campaign to win, they're going to have to win some number of what initially looks at first like votes for the other side. That's what happens when you can just track them by party, but you can't track them by vote. Georgia is blessedly off the table for discussion because they don't do it by party. I love that because, I don't want to know about how many Democrats showed up. I want to know about how many Harris voters showed up, and you don't find that out until Election Day.
Yeah. Georgia's an interesting case. I don't know whether I'm not sure how that ended up getting designed the way they do their registration. It actually kind of worries me. Geez, Georgia really just tracks your registration by race? And I worry about what that might mean. But as it happens,
self-described.
Yeah. It's helpful in some way. If only, I don't know if it's helpful in a proactive sense. It's helpful that you can't use their data to run the other story, I guess. I don't know if there's any good done by the other way, but all right, it keeps them out of the data pool, which maybe is good. Okay, I'll take it.
Well, if all of a sudden blacks fall to 8% of the voting public, maybe something's going on in terms of voter suppression. So it's sort of nice to know.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
I don't know if it's a remnant of that or not, but
I don't know what the motivation was, or for how long they've done it either. I don't know. So I guess I could try to make a better guess if I knew. Was this a long-standing rule? If it was just put in place by the Republican-controlled legislature, I would think something different. But I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. So just be careful about that. I don't think that the vote in Nevada looks particularly good for us right now. But I don't know what it's going to mean in the end. No. Got another week to go.
We could always
I know that
gamble
Republicans
our votes
started early, and I don't know if Democrats finish strong. They often do. And I don't know how Republicans are voting. They're from the rurals, so I think they're going to vote for Trump. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what the others are going to do. That is to say, not Democrat, not Republican. They're called others. And I don't know what the vote's finally going to be. I can't say that I'm optimistic about Nevada based on the early vote, but we don't really know yet.
Yeah, but again, Nevada, just a weird place. And it's the sort of thing that Donald Trump will complain is obviously evidence of cheating and rigging, but somehow 75% of the state works at casinos, and they all vote on election day, all at once. They take buses to the polls and they vote. And they don't do it early for some reason. I don't know why they don't do that. The bosses should be encouraging early voting so that they can staff their buffet lines better. But this is a tradition. Right. I don't know what it is.
Patrick Dillon goes on to say, look, I don't think I'm wrong. I really don't. But
okay. Well, he doesn't think that.
Look, but I really believe this, and I think we're going to be okay. And I remind people, if I didn't think we're going to be okay, I wouldn't write posts like this.
It's true, but mostly he doesn't, and he's only doing this one, so we'll see. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know,
but I thought,
I'm not starting.
You really pulled together pretty much everything I was talking about from the beginning of the show, so
that's pretty good. Yeah. So, all right. What are you saying? We should have just read that?
Well, the funny thing is, I just found that. I didn't read it at the beginning of the show.
Oh.
I found it right before I posted it because Dana had linked to it.
All right. Well, he knew you would enjoy it.
Yeah, well, he was right.
You should write to Patrick and say maybe you should start a Substack.
No, because then he'll start a Substack.
Yeah. Well, okay. You should go elsewhere and pretend it's a Substack, but not really.
He's got a day job that sort of precludes that sort of thing because he made pains with to say, I'm doing this on my own time.
Ah, okay.
9 to 5.
And he just doesn't have that much.
Yeah.
I guess because of how much he's working elsewhere for someone else.
Besides, if he does this, how much time is he going to be able to see his wife? Because, she's busy, too.
Well, if she's substacking, I guess that could happen anywhere. All right. That's true. Take care of your family. Like that podcaster guy who just said he was quitting to spend more time with the family.
Oh, who did that?
Rats. I forget what the guy's name is. He's one of the big famous right-leaning ones that just... Tim Pool? That got caught up in one of the payola scandals, I guess.
Is he the one that's taking time off?
Yes, he says he's going to back off of his very aggressive full-time podcasting schedule to spend more time with his family, but there's an asterisk on this. He does not have a family, and what he says he means is, I'm going to take more time off to go in search of a partner with whom I could start a family. Not that he has one. I'm taking time off for our engagement.
Asterisk number 2 is the courts may have something to say about this too.
Right, that's true. They may rule
that
he's not allowed to have a family.
They won't be suing me.
Okay. Also, he wears a beanie all the time, and I think that might be kind of like birth control, a little bit. Yeah,
Serve the back bacon.
Right, and apparently so far the ladies have not found this effective as an attractant.
Maybe you should change it once in a while.
Sure, take it off, shampoo the hair, give it a shot.
Listener Mad Hatter, Elrond 50. I didn't know Elrond was 50. I thought he was like 5,000. He's lives forever. But anyway, Mad Hatter says, Harris is coming to Houston has been a shot in the arm to local Democratic activists. Her visit might help the regional candidates more than anything else, which is good. I mean, there's going to be good that comes out of it. 'Tis an ill wind that blows nobody any good. The question is, why is the Harris campaign doing it? I promise you, they didn't do it to help the regional candidates. They don't have time. Time is that's another thing Dana taught me. Time is the most precious thing to a candidate, and how you allocate it tells you everything about what their strategy is.
Okay. Well,
so she's taking a day off to go to Houston. I think it's because they want to highlight her closing argument about reproductive rights, because I think the way she wins is to juice up women voters, just like Trump thinks the way he wins is to juice up male voters with Joe Rogan fantasies.
Look, I guess if you can delay, at worst, if the worst thing that comes out of it is that or the best thing that comes out of it is that you delay the Texas call for an hour, that's not a bad thing either. Because, if you're expecting, look, that's a big red win and it's going to put a huge number of electoral votes in the Trump column, but that doesn't come until 2 a.m. because you're like, surprisingly close in Texas, though we still predict, that's a good strategy. That's a thing you can do. Okay.
Well, it's really going to be interesting because should she go on and win?
She should. I think we should tell her that.
Yeah. And she should really go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Make it your priority. Should she go ahead and win the whole election?
Like going on Call Her Daddy, The View.
Sure.
And other women's issues shows.
Yes.
And the male reporters who are trying to figure out what's going on here continue to underestimate that audience and the saliency of Dobbs' Roe Dobbs. Dobbs.
Right.
I'm old. Roe.
Just Dobbs.
Roe. All of that stuff.
Yeah.
And the secret hidden vote is Republican women between 50 and a certain age.
Infinity. Really, it doesn't stop.
They don't like to say that. It's a certain age,
Okay.
You don't have to pin it down.
Oh, I see. All right. So, it's a very genteel era.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, that is like the hot new social media trend, too. Stories
it's the soccer moms, right?
About, soccer grandmas, I guess. But yes.
Women of a certain age.
That's, I see what you mean now. That's the new dynamic. The new, someone's got to write the book. And you could. It would make a great book, whether a serious academic study or a coffee table book, but the anecdotes that are hot on the social medias right now is about particularly about older women, like classifiable as elderly in many cases, and widowed women who are telling the stories of how when their husbands were alive they just were never allowed to do the things that they wanted to and that other women everywhere were doing, and then now that their husbands have passed away.
Of a certain age, voting for the first time because my husband told me not to.
Yeah, and now I've seen just a dozen similar stories, not always about voting, but about, simple things like having a life or using lipstick. My husband always told me not to wear lipstick because, I saw this one this morning, it would attract the attention of other men. At 85, whatever. Don't worry about it. So anyway, as it happens, he passes away. She says, "Damn it, I've been waiting my whole life. I'm going to put on some lipstick. I'm going to
put it on my forehead because I'm not used to it, but I'll do it."
Well, that will attract the attention of other men and women, I must say. Yeah. But
and if you're a reporter, so come and write me up.
Right. Although. You put lipstick on your forehead. That's crazy.
I'm not doing it backwards.
You smeared it, right? You smear it all over your face and turn your face orange. Yeah. That is normal.
Yeah. On the other hand, maybe I'll get a movie contract.
Right. Sure. Why not? I don't know. But there's all sorts of things. The wearing lipstick. One of them was buying desserts for yourself at the supermarket because your husband, I guess, either he didn't like desserts or he just forbade it for you because lest you lose your figure at 89 years of age.
A friend of mine on Twitter sent me this. I just have to read it to you.
Yeah.
This morning on CNN, Scott Jennings says there are thousands of Hitlers running around college campuses in New York City.
There are.
And the quote was, "Can you believe we actually reached the he praised Hitler, but level the depths you have to sink to defend Trump?" And that would be Scott Jennings, who is an amazing sycophant, really worth every penny CNN pays for.
Okay. The Hitler situation is a little bit out of control.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
All right. Yeah, there you go. I see it now. Right.
Too many little Hitlers.
Well, you know where Hitlers love to hang out? College campuses. What is he talking about? Okay. Very weird. I have to hunt down those that one collection of elderly women set free stories.
Not elderly, women of a certain age.
Right. Yes. What did I say? The wrong one? Yeah. Okay. Women of a certain age. They're certain what the age is. I know that. They just won't tell us. Got it. Well, at any rate, women at last set free from the weird petty tyrannies of their husbands. What can you do? It was a different generation, they usually say when trying to explain this. And you have to. And you don't want to be hard on the women, obviously. But clearly it's been tough waiting for their turn to do what they want to do. And congratulations to them for feeling this kind of freedom at last. But it really happens. I'll have to go and dig it up somewhere. And if you can identify it out there in the audience, please send it my way. Save me the time. And that's that. We've got music coming in about a minute here. Anything else you want to try to sneak in besides see you tomorrow?
No, pretty much done. The only other thing I would say is that being a longtime native New Yorker, I'm very pleased the Yankees are in the World Series again, and that it's against the Dodgers, because it gets to remind me of all of the great Jackie Robinson pictures and videos that are out there, and just what a wonderful ball player and person he was. And so Yankees-Dodgers is that until Friday, when it's like the modern Yankees and Dodgers. But still, you can still close your eyes and see Yogi Berra arguing about whether Robinson was safe when he stole home, or, Mickey versus Willie versus the Duke in center field.
True. Yes. I did see, because they're all in the news now, sadly, the passing of Fernando Valenzuela, though a Dodger, if you're a Yankees fan. But still, I think you have room in your heart for Fernando Valenzuela.
Always.
The phenom of the 80s. So, young, 63.
And Luis Tiant recently passed away, too.
Oh, yeah, true, right.
One thing the Red Sox and Yankee fans share is love of Louis.
Okay. It's everybody can be teary-eyed and reminiscing there. All right, well, we'll see you tomorrow. And that, too. We'll reminisce. How about we reminisce about the misty memories of today?
Exactly.
It's all misty now. We're old. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One thing we have not yet commented on, which I don't really want to spend a great deal of time on, because I know already, and part of the overwhelming Hitler dynamic for the Trump campaign. New York Times reporting, it's news because a new person has said it in a new way. This time John Kelly, Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, and he had about 19 of them, says that he believed that Donald Trump met the definition of a fascist, and that he, that is to say that he is one. The headline they're going with, as election nears, Kelly warns Trump would rule like a dictator, and it doesn't feel like news because Trump has been out there campaigning, saying, I will rule like a dictator. And now someone else is saying, he's right, he will rule like a dictator. And that he admired Hitler, and we kind of know that as well. John Kelly has been upfront about how bad Trump would be. He's the 99th former Trump administration staffer who has said so. So in that sense, it's not really news. I guess the specificity is what makes the news. And, it's late in the election cycle. Some people might have missed it before. By the way, we're nearing the 10-day mark. Greg keeps bringing up James Comey 10 days before the election, right, announcing that they're going to be, reopening the investigation. But yes, no, maybe so. Reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, yada, yada. If you've forgotten what that felt like, imagine that if on this Friday, which would be about 10 days before the election, if the FBI director, now it's Christopher Wray, were to announce that the FBI is reopening the investigation into Trump's connections with Vladimir Putin and Russia, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything, or maybe we think there's something to it that we didn't get to talk about earlier, and it's time for us to reopen that investigation. That would be essentially the same thing. And I think putting it that way and imagining that happening right now seems like such a shock to the system. Like, no way. That's definitely not going to happen. I guess in the chaos of the run-up to the election with Trump on the ticket the first time, and we were all just so shocked that this was even happening in the first place, we forgot it. Again, maybe it's just another one of the things that have fallen down the memory hole from flooding the zone all the time. It becomes impossible. I mean, the number of things that people call out every time they're supposed to be listing the travesties of the Trump era, you can't believe what you remember happening, but just forget to put in the off the top of your head list. And this is one of them. That Comey thing happened. We remember it. We remind ourselves of it all the time. Greg announces it and reminds us of it all the time. It's just, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, I know that, but you're right. That was huge. Why isn't this uppermost in my mind? And imagine, right, the magnitude of this thing. Can you imagine I mean, on the other hand, I guess you can also imagine the major newspapers, including the New York Times, just simply not reporting on it. The FBI reopens investigation directly into connections between Trump and the Kremlin, coordinating, colluding on campaigns in 2016, 2020, even currently in 2024. We're reopening that investigation this Friday. And, it would still be like, well, Kamala Harris might have plagiarized something. Did you see that one, too? They're trying mightily, Chris Rufo, striving day in and day out to try to create a plagiarism controversy around Kamala Harris. They tried one and launched it, and it fizzled the other day. I forget, fizzled so badly I've already forgotten what the allegation was supposed to be. Although I do find it kind of, in the abstract, somewhat amusing in the sense of like, gee, Chris Rufo, the great thought leader, he actually couldn't come up with a different controversy. I don't know. Plagiarism worked last time. We were trying to get rid of a woman of color. Let's try it again. So I don't know. He launched something. We discussed it briefly. I can't even remember what it was. Today's attempt is, I don't even know if it reaches back to Rufo or not, but the story of it is CNN is running with on this one. The story headline is Kamala Harris lifted language. Well, not the headline, but the social media posts about it say Kamala Harris lifted language from a Republican attorney when she testified in front of Congress in 2007. So we're talking a long time ago here. A CNN review of her testimony finds the article itself is under the headline of Harris lifted language from a Republican attorney in her 2007 congressional testimony. M. Steck is the reporter. I believe we've used her stuff in the past. But what's interesting is that the story itself reports what's actually happening here, which just doesn't support even really, honestly, publishing the story, much less doing so under the headline and with the argument that there's plagiarism here or lifting language from a Republican attorney. Because what actually happened here, a fair reading of this is that the Republican attorney lifted the language. Not from himself, but the whole idea here is, well, long story short on this is that this was congressional testimony provided under the auspices of the National Attorney General's Association, or District Attorneys Association, and that Kamala Harris, at that time, district attorney in, where? San Francisco? Yes. Was a member and was testifying on issues of concern to district attorneys. And so was this other Republican attorney who goes by the name of Paul Logli, because that's what his parents named him. And is it Logli? L-O-G-L-I. I don't know how it's pronounced exactly. But essentially, he testified first on this particular issue, whatever it even was. I could read you the story. But I think we'll just distill the facts out of it. He testified first, and his testimony cited a particular study and some statistics that bolstered the case being made by the National District Attorneys Association, National Association of District Attorneys, and they were both testifying from the same perspective and on the same subject, essentially to show that both Republican and Democratic elected district attorneys all felt the same way about this, and that the Judiciary Committee, House Judiciary Committee in this case, should help them out with it in support of the John R. Justice, that's the real person's name apparently, John R. Justice Prosecutors and Defenders Incentive Act of 2007, which apparently would have created student loan repayment programs for state and local prosecutors and public defenders. If you go to law school and you need to defray your costs, if you go into public service law, your loans, you could get help paying back your loans, or I guess maybe have loans forgiven in some way. And both Democrats and Republicans thought this was a great idea, so they both testified in favor of it. And they both said, as a matter of fact, in this case, both Paul Logley and Kamala Harris said, in answer to the question from the National District Attorneys Association, National Association, I guess, NADA, National Association of District Attorneys, will you come to Washington and testify in favor of this thing? Sure, but I'm very busy. Don't worry about it. We'll give you prepared testimony, and you can come and deliver that. So they prepared this testimony for Paul Logley. He came, he testified, he told them this thing. Next hearing on the thing was, I guess, about 2 months later, and Kamala Harris showed up, and they said, here is some testimony for you. And one paragraph out of, I don't know how long she spoke, one paragraph of her testimony was very similar to that given by Paul Logley because it cited the same study and reached the same conclusion. But Paul Logley didn't author the paragraph himself either. So it's not plagiarism, for one thing, nor was it Paul Logley's original content when he read it to them 2 months prior. So it's definitely not plagiarism. It's just an excuse to try to bring that word up again very close to the election. And that's all there is to it. There's just nothing. As somebody says in the end here, a philosophy professor at Ohio Dominican University who wrote a book on plagiarism. I guess you could say literally wrote a book on plagiarism. Anyway, to apply the high expectation of originality found in journalism or academic writing to political speeches is misguided. A precise use of the label plagiarism requires a context in which originality is rightly expected. I mean, if you're going to do that, then everything Donald Trump reads off a teleprompter is plagiarism. He didn't write it, but he's claiming it as his own speech. So it must be plagiarism. And yet you'll never get such a headline. Anyway, that's what's happening in that story. It's just not plagiarism. It's goofy garbage, and they're wasting your time with it. Now, what about other things that I could be wasting your time with? Well, there was, of course, the report that I mentioned right at the beginning. Scott sent me a version of it from ABC News. The headline here on it is, Judge who tossed Trump's classified docs case is on the list of proposed candidates for Attorney General. Just wanted to cite the work here for you. ABC News' Catherine Falders, Will Staken, John Santucci, and Alexander Mallon all had to get together and work on this one. There's, again, not that much to it. We probably shouldn't spend too much time worrying about it. But, yeah, Aileen Cannon, who is terrible and has been a judge, or in fact a lawyer, for about 15 minutes, now, on a short list, I guess. I mean, why is the list so short? Because I didn't want to spend any time actually writing it, because it doesn't matter. But essentially, I don't know. Are there other people even on the list? I guess it doesn't really matter. I wouldn't put it past Trump. He absolutely could do this. I don't know whether... I guess it really just honestly, it's interesting. Imagine that we're down to this. Would you make such an inexperienced and compromised person Attorney General of the United States of America? Well, if there are 50 Republicans in Congress and then J.D. Vance as vice president, the answer is, yep, you would. So, that's kind of bad news just in general. I won't spend a great deal of time on it. We'll move on. from it. I think, as important as it is and as scary as it would be, I think it's, no, I don't know. Yeah, how can you afford to spend time worrying about it right now? Just win the election and then let's make it not a problem. But put it on the list of things that are terrible about Donald Trump. How about that? So let's see. I got a couple of other things to share with you, including, oh yes, I did mention at some point the list of horribles about Donald Trump, and I think, if I have it right here, this item in pocket, yes, is a Blue Sky thread by Own All the Things, or I guess you would have to say Pwn, PWN, Pwn All the Things on Blue Sky, stating here, this thread acts as a bit of a reminder of just how much we've memory hold about the Trump administration. And it occurs to me that one of the cool things about taking lots of notes is it was a lot crazier than we remember, like a lot crazier. What's he talking about? He's referring to his own earlier post in which, let's see, this is yesterday's LOL GOP calling out of why haven't the Democrats answered the question of, if Donald Trump is so dangerous, how come the consequences of his presidency weren't worse? And LOL GOP answered that in all caps with, there were semis filled with dead bodies because the morgues were overflowing. And I answered, and many other people joined in the same thread and said all the terrible things that we remembered. Pwn All the Things, commenting on that yesterday, saying that the article that LOL GOP was referencing does, in fairness, go on to answer because people in his administration stopped him. Why weren't the consequences so as bad as, or worse? And why don't we remember this? Because people in his administration stopped him. But even there, it's only some things that were stopped. If you are a rich white male citizen, that administration was uncouth, alarming, and exhausting. But for other folks, his administration wasn't stopped. So, for instance, he goes on then to put together a list of the things that he remembers from his own notes, and it too is not comprehensive. Apropos of nothing, he says, here's a thread of Trump's first month in office. Right? Never mind the first month of campaign and the things he said. The first month in office, if that's what you're worried about, why wasn't the administration so bad? I can't believe that you would think that if you literally just took a look at the history of what happened. The first month in office, January 20th through February 20th, 2017. Just as a reminder of how crazy it was and how much has been forgotten. And again, it's often not forgotten because when they say it, you say, oh yeah, I do remember that. It's just, it's the zone was so flooded, it's impossible to come up with all of it. And even he doesn't do it. January 20th, the day of the inauguration, right? How much trouble could there have been on Inauguration Day? Well, he comes out and gives this bizarro American carnage speech right from the get-go. He's literally just been sworn in, and he gets up and gives a rambling, and I mean, that should be the most set play of all speeches. And I think he does largely just read it from the teleprompter, plagiarism, as you know. But remember that in place of the normal speech about the hope and promise of the upcoming administration, he says, American carnage, the carnage, the carnage. And that's kind of weird. And everybody's noticed it. Then, of course, the next day, well, a couple of things happen. One, Trump visits CIA headquarters, which is, okay, whatever, but it's a little bit of an unusual stop for day one of the administration. And then there gives an incoherent speech. Folks are pretty confused by it. He, for instance, mocks the CIA star wall of fallen agents. I prefer CIA agents who don't get killed, right? And talks about how he would then renovate the foyer of the CIA building and knock down some of the pillars. To come in and give a speech about, to hell with all the people who died for the CIA, that sucks anyway. P.S. I don't like the look of this joint. I would put up some gold, knock down some of these pillars, maybe put in a kiosk selling Trump hats, something like that. So, I mean, that was just kind of weird all by itself. And then, of course, I assume they get back around to it at some point, but maybe it wasn't right away that they did this. But then the Trump White House spends a great deal of time disputing the crowd size at the inauguration. I don't know why that isn't mentioned here. Maybe it took a couple of days to have that before they got around to that fight. So I'll just read it as it's put here. But speaking of the weird trip to the CIA, like why go there at all? Why then go there and insult the people who have given their lives in the service of the country through the CIA's auspices, and then tell them that he has some decorating tips for them? Well, this I don't think I did know. It later turns out that the trip was arranged by Jared Kushner for some reason. Why? I have no idea. Like, why would he arrange it? One, and why would you listen to him at all? This, by the way, happens despite assertions at the time that Kushner and other family members would not be a part of the administration. Guess we all know how that turned out. January 22nd, just 2 days in, Mike Flynn, the notorious spy, is sworn in as National Security Advisor. A spy is National Security Advisor, you say? That's crazy. No, it happened. That's also the day that Trump has a meeting with senior staff in the Oval Office and makes a special point of calling out FBI Director Comey. Comey later says he wished he could have been just blended into the blue curtains there, which he later supplanted with gold curtains. January 23rd, and Pompeo's nomination goes through and he becomes director of the CIA. Meanwhile, in the White House, Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, there it is. Oh no, it's about something else. Lies to them by denying that Flynn discussed sanctions with Russian Ambassador Kislyak to lift sanctions against Russia that Obama had imposed. January 24th, and out of the view of the public, but based on details that come out later, the FBI shows up at the White House to interview Flynn. Flynn has been on the job 2 days at this point, and he's got an FBI investigation. Flynn lies to them about discussions with Kislyak, and later he will be charged and plead guilty to that lie. January 26th, the DOJ warns White House counsel Don McGahn that they know Flynn lied in that interview. January 27th, and the White House issues Executive Order 13769, the Muslim ban. Airports are overrun, planes are diverted, families torn apart, advocates around the nation mobilize and try to mitigate it but can't. Airports, airlines, and even DHS weren't given advance notice. Right? So that too should speak to the whole deportation effort, right? That he's just, you say, well, the logistics of doing such a thing are incredible. And they are. And there will be no, there could be that if it's a repeat of the first administration, there'll be no plan for it. He just decides it's a good idea and tweets it out. And then everybody's like, I guess we should start making policy based on this. No advance notice to all this. So total chaos at the airports. Later that day, January 27th, Trump has a dinner with FBI Director Comey, per Comey's contemporaneous notes, and tells him, I need your loyalty. Doesn't work out. That's the first week. 1 week. All of that stuff happened. January 28th, Papadopoulos is interviewed and lies to the FBI about his communications with the Trump campaign. January 30th, acting. Where's my acting? There it is. Acting. Attorney General Sally Yates is fired after writing a memo indicating that the Muslim ban executive order is not lawful and the Department of Justice cannot defend it. January 31st, Gorsuch is nominated for SCOTUS. Rod Rosenstein is nominated to be Deputy Attorney General. February 1st, former ExxonMobil Chairman and CEO Rex Tillerson is confirmed in the Senate for Secretary of State. We all know how long that lasts and what he thinks of Donald Trump. February 3rd, and we get the first court intervening in the Muslim ban, the first temporary restraining order. Also on February 3rd, a leaked transcript of POTUS's call with Mexico and Australia. It's so unhinged, someone ends up leaking it and it becomes front page news. We're not even 2 weeks in yet. February 8th, Sessions is confirmed as Attorney General. He'll later resign. To be fair, so will Flynn and Rex Tillerson, but that's for later. For now, Sessions, a man once deemed too racist to be a judge, becomes Trump's Attorney General, if you think the Aileen Cannon thing can't work. And he still somehow ends this saga as one of the better ones coming out of this administration. Also on February 8th, Flynn tells the Washington Post that he didn't discuss sanctions with Kislyak, though he did. On February 9th, Flynn now walks back his denial less than a day after I didn't discuss sanctions. He tells the Wall Street Journal he now can't recall if he discussed sanctions with Kislyak. February 11th, and our first non-self-inflicted test of foreign policy, the North Koreans launch a missile while Trump is at dinner at Mar-a-Lago with Japan's Shinzo Abe. Trump deals with it at dinner in front of guests and, of course, in front of Shinzo Abe as well. We're only 3 weeks in here at this point, right? And it blabs about a national security invasion right out on the back patio during dinner with all the guests around. February 13th, Kellyanne Conway tells the press General Flynn enjoys the full confidence of the president. Slightly later on February 13th, Flynn resigns as National Security Advisor. Full confidence, and then out the same day. By the way, one of the things that people called out in the comments to this thing that he left out of this is somewhere in here is when Kellyanne Conway, I guess with respect to the inauguration crowd, coins the alternative facts phrase. That stuck with us. February 14th, Valentine's Day, Trump has another meeting with FBI Director Comey. Trump orders the room emptied and tells Comey to leave Flynn alone, i.e. drop the case against Flynn. Of course, he's later convicted, but then again, later pardoned of that conviction. It is full confidence. I resign. I can't recall. Oh my God. No wonder he's so notorious as a spy. His spycraft is horrible. February 17th, Comey meets the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, which sends a letter to a dozen agencies ordering preservation of records relating to Russian interference in the 2016 election. February 19th, we're nearing the end of the first month, Lewandowski, remember him? Says there was no contact between the campaign and Russia. Funnily enough, that was also not true. And then to round it out, February 21st, Trump appoints McMaster as acting, APNSA. I don't even know what we're talking about here. What is APNSA? National Security Advisor, but what's the P in there? All right. Anyway, that's the first month, 1 month of his administration. Wow. So there you go. Just as a reminder of, well, if Trump is so bad, how come there isn't any evidence of how bad it really was? How come no one remembers? I don't know, but it was as bad, if not worse, than you're capable of remembering. It's just the human brain just doesn't have room for all of this stuff, I guess. All right. I thought I would remind you of all of that. Let's see. Other things to bring to your attention. Golly. Well, it's near to our third break, so I'm trying to see what might be able to fit in between now and the break music. And of course, the answer is basically nothing. However, I guess I could. Wow, so many directions to go in. I don't know. I guess we could use it on this. I'll introduce you to a story that we might be able to give some time to after the break, which was sent around via social media, and I grabbed this one from Helder Gill, G-I-L, last name, who posts absolutely fascinating and terrifying story on how a fake immigration invasion of a small town in Alabama got tons of social media and Fox News attention, and was completely wrong. Very much an attempt at following up what I guess Chris Rufo and other Republicans like them thought was the great success of the Springfield, Ohio story. They simply attempted to manufacture a similar story based out of Alabama, and it was garbage, not true, heavily exaggerated, and also never really made a dent in the national news, anything like Springfield did, though they were trying mightily to do it. I mean, at some point, Chris Rufo should basically be able to draw the conclusion that not all of this stuff is replicable. It's just virality strikes, There's no particular explanation for it, and you can't replicate it, so you shouldn't even try. But that didn't stop them from at least giving it an effort down in Alabama. But what I thought was very striking about this story was how many elements of it we've seen before. Not only is it the, oh my God, we're being overrun by Haitian immigrants story, and not only is it also not true, but it involves the same sort of weird ideas about buses arriving, mysterious buses arriving from out of nowhere and dropping people off in coordinated fashion. And thinking back even further than the Haitian story, remember when it was Antifa super soldiers? Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So I mentioned to you that there was this attempt at recreating the Springfield, Ohio story based in Alabama. And I guess you could be forgiven if you missed it entirely, because it just didn't, there was a failure to thrive. It just never really took off. But it had this weird additional element. It reminded me very much of stories from, I don't remember exactly what was circulating at the time, but there was the rumor, was it around 2020 election time? Was it something after? I can't even remember. But that people in the Pacific Northwest, well, MAGA Republicans in the Pacific Northwest, got caught up in this crazy rumor mill that there were busloads of Antifa people, and they referred to them sometimes as Antifa super soldiers, because why not? That were on a caravan of buses, and they were coming to like invade some small backwater town and just take it over and create chaos and who knows what, secede from Oregon and create an anarchist capital paradise. I have no idea what they thought they were going to do, but they became convinced that there was such a organization as Antifa. 2, that they had super soldiers. 3, that they decided to put their super soldiers on chartered buses. And 4, that even though there were no buses to be found anywhere on the roads in Oregon, a black family who had gone camping somewhere was probably it, and they should just stop them using their AR-15s, et cetera, et cetera. You remember all this? Does this ring a bell? It came to mind because of the bus thing. That this seems to be a fascination with the Republicans, that they are pretty sure that they're going to be invaded by bus. I really don't know what that is. But anyway, it leads to a gift link to an article in the Atlantic, which means, I guess we could actually probably read it to you, which is terrific, even though it's a bit of a long read. But let's see if we can't I'll give you at least a flavor of what's going on. And I'm hoping that maybe we can get back to that article describing the weirdness of the various venture capitalists, San Francisco tech weirdos that underlie the J.D. Vance campaign, because it's a separate campaign from the Trump campaign, I think. But But anyway, let me get to the Atlantic piece here. The invasion that wasn't, pretty much like all of these imaginary invasions. Conspiracy Theories in Small-Town America by Elena Plott Calabro, who writes, by way of setting the tone here, the Haitians had come to this town in Alabama, which is Sylacauga is the name of the town. I think we even have the pronunciation about right. Sylacauga, Sylacauga. So they'd come to Sylacauga by bus because coming by spaceship was just simply out of the question, I guess. 2 buses, possibly even 3. Yeah, watch out. But certainly more than 1. Of this, one resident was sure. As he explained on Facebook, which is where you go with all the important, totally true things, he'd been told by someone who'd spotted them unloading in the Walmart parking lot, which is where all secret operations happen, of course. Jade Helm, and now, of course, this secret invasion of Sylacauga. And again, I am positive that there's at least more than 1 bus. I know this because I have been told by someone who saw it. I just paused for dramatic effect there because I can't believe you're that dumb, sir. The federal government had chartered the transport, locals were saying. Now, again, I didn't see it, but I know someone who did. So, therefore, from that, I am able to tell you that the federal government chartered the transport, that it was an effort to cripple the welfare state of the small Alabama town as punishment for voting red. Follow the money, one suggested. What money? What are you even talking about? How can I follow? What money? Where do I begin? Well, there was a bus, and a bus costs money. Well, who has money? The federal government has money. There, I followed the money. No, you said 2 things about money. You didn't follow anything. Like it's a forensic investigation, forensic accounting. This costs money. I know one entity that has money. Ta-da! Mystery solved. You did it! The case cracker once again gets in there. I need to get that clip, obviously. Anyway, I love that. That's what passes for I've done my own research on the internet. Follow the money. That's just shorthand for believe what I say. Because it sounds like I say follow the money. That must mean you'll think I followed it. I didn't follow it. I want you to follow it. But somehow I say follow the money. You think the money's been followed. The city council had known that they were coming. Which may or may not be true. This is what they throw out there. Follow the money. The city council knew they were coming. No. Actually, it was the mayor who'd taken a bribe from Washington, D.C., that is, who'd quietly transformed Sylacauga into a sanctuary city while praying that his constituents wouldn't notice. That's what they figured. I follow the money means that I've heard about this thing called money. I've heard the buses cost money. I've heard that Washington, D.C. controls money. So I figure they paid for the buses. Oh, and of course, they probably bribed the mayor. Because the buses arrived. If they hadn't bribed the mayor, those buses would not have gotten here. Or the mayor would have said, no, by power vested in me as mayor of Sylacauga, Alabama, I hereby declare you must stop these buses and turn them around. By what power would anybody do this? Anyway, too late. He was hoping that they wouldn't notice, but they had noticed. Members of a local Facebook group devoted to things going on in Sylacauga, that's the name of the Facebook group, knew about the 750 plus FEMA trailers. Remember, this is all recycled conspiracy garbage. Now it's FEMA trailers. 750 plus coming in to house the new migrants. Talking to barbershop, it quotes here from the page, is more like 1,500 FEMA trailers. I think there's like 25,000 people maybe. I think they give the population of Sylacauga at some point. It's not a big place. Where are there 1,500 house-sized trailers being stored? I mean, they bring up later in the story, have any of you seen them? No, because they're not here. Well, they're made out of invisible stealth airplane material. I mean, these guys can believe anything. They knew the shelter. I'm sorry. Where are we here? Talking to barbershop 1,500. They knew the conspiracy nuts think they knew anyway, about the shelter being built in nearby Childersburg for others still to come. 1,500 trailers wasn't going to contain them all, apparently. It's about time we said something about this invasion, one resident declared on September 17th. This was like last month. A Sylacauga City Council member named Laura Barlow Heath briefed the nation on Fox News. Thank you for your service, ma'am. Here's the briefing. There is fear here of becoming the next Springfield, Ohio, she said, making the plan obvious. When is enough enough? When do they stop coming in? The town is a fraction of the size of Springfield, just over 12,500 people, so even smaller, or half the size that I said, 25,000. There's 1,500 trailers coming into a town of 12,500 people. Sure. Anyway, and we're without answers, Heath stressed. Civil unrest was imminent. At a city council meeting that night, a resident named Charles Mackin said the local Walmart had come to feel more like a third world airport. He worried about hotels and apartment complexes being taken over. If you can't stop that, then we're going to have to stop it, he told the council. You understand? So he's threatening the council now. We got to go and stop this invasion, which isn't happening. The truth was that local and state officials didn't know much more about the Haitian migrants than the residents themselves, their legal status, their path to Alabama, or even how many had come. Conspiracy theories bloomed in the void when officials began deconstructing the rumors, pointing out that there was no FEMA trailer park or migrant shelter, that the buses in the viral photograph on social media contained a high school football team en route to an away game. I mean, that's what's happening. If you're going to a football game and you stop to get snacks and use the bathroom, Republicans will think they're being invaded by Haitians. That's the minds that we're talking about here. Those people vote, by the way. But that's all it takes. A bus stops, that's an invasion. It's a football team on their way from point A to point B. No, Haitian migrants. 1,500 families with FEMA trailers and camps, and they're taking us away, and I can't believe it, and we're going to have to kill somebody. A football team went to get snacks and go to the bathroom. That's what happened here. Well, anyway, this influx, supposedly, of Haitian migrants, were there any? There were a few dozen migrants who'd come legally to work, mainly at nearby auto manufacturing plants. Many locals, though, called that a cover-up. Well, I seen them at the Walmart. No, you saw a football team. That's a cover-up. It's not. It's what happened. By then, they had already pledged their fidelity to a story. Sylacauga was the victim of a Haitian sortie orchestrated by city leaders in concert with the Biden administration. A conspiracy all the more alarming for its proximity to the presidential election. I can't believe they tried to affect the outcome of an election. Well, a writer tells us I grew up just under 2 hours from Sylacauga, a town best known, or at least to me, as a flagship of Bluebell creameries, and thought it curious that for all the declarations of invasion, there seemed to be very few dispatches from the front lines, like, well, we're being invaded. Have you ever heard of Sylacauga before today? Probably not. Don't you think there would be more news coming out of there? And so, at the end of September, I went to observe for myself this community on the trembling edge of civil unrest. What I found was one small house on South Main Avenue with air mattresses in the living room, no table in the kitchen, a single new student in the school system, and 6 Haitians in a church pew. The big invasion. They're going to overwhelm our schools. One student. These are single people coming to work. They're not bringing families for the most part. When they do, and they have kids, fine. They're in the new school system here. One new student. Oh, no. Oh, I mean 1 million. Sorry. Most of the Haitians came to Sylacauga in June, but not until August did anyone seem to care. They had a viral story about it in Springfield, Ohio. Can we have a viral story too? That was when residents of Albertville, 85 miles to the north, posted photos online of charter buses picking up and dropping off Haitian migrants at, quote, odd hours around town. Odd hours? No. I need a more interesting music for these things. But for years, Haitians had lived without incident in Albertville, but the buses were new, and rumor had it that they were coming from out of state. In fact, city leaders quickly determined they were transporting, that is to say the buses, transporting employees of a poultry processor to and from work. Residents called on Jay Palmer anyway. Why? Jay Palmer, an Alabama native, described himself as a whistleblower and a former Trump immigration advisor, though I struggled to find any evidence of an association with the former president. There's no evidence of you having any connection with Trump. Well, you're not a Trump immigration advisor, former or otherwise. Well, I can't really go into a lot of details, Palmer told me. There was a program we were going to start, and that's really all I'm going to say. So there's the evidence on that one. Since mid-August, he's been on kind of a fearmonger's tour of the state. This is not happening just because they chose to come here, he assured a church gathering in Albertville. They were sent here. This is about votes and cheap labor. Cheap labor, yes. Votes? No, he explained. And he urged good Albertvillians to stay vigilant. The hysteria in Albertville breached city limits in the weeks that followed, sweeping through communities across Alabama where Haitian migrants had been spotted, and some where none appeared to be living at all. And then it landed in Sylacauga. Not even Mayor Jim Hagel, maybe Hagel, H-E-I-G-L, can identify the precise moment when things changed. The event or sighting or imagining even that triggered the flurry of calls from residents demanding to know if Sylacauga had become a sanctuary city. He cannot say, for example, why one woman felt suddenly moved to park in front of that house on South Main and hold her phone just high enough above the dash to film 6 Haitian men as they sat in the front yard talking. Can you believe it? Across from the daycare, she'd captioned the upload on Facebook. Can't believe it. Truth be told, obviously, plus they're also pedophiles, of course, because they're across from a daycare. Whatever. Truth be told, Hagel, a pleasant and drowsy-eyed man in his 80s, preferred not to say anything about the past 8 weeks at all. It wasn't fair how people had portrayed his hometown. Hernando de Soto had traveled through the area, and also, did I know about the calcium carbonate? Backbone of our city, he said proudly. Sylacauga's sister city, Pietrasanta in Italy, has white marble too, he noted, but it's not as dense as Alabama's, so the Italians really enjoy coming and working with our marble. Nice things about the place. Anyway, all Hagel could say for certain was about what had gone wrong, what had led to the city council meeting on September 5th that pitched Sylacauga into the national spotlight. Did it? It was this. Some people crawled out from under a rock and smelled something, and they just ran with it. That's what he says. Now, a new figure emerges here, Tiffany Nix. We knew people were going to come. Tiffany Nix, the council president, later told me about that meeting, but we never expected what happened to happen. The evening began calmly enough. After signing off on the city's accounts payable invoices for the fiscal year, Nix opened the floor to public comment, and that's the problem. A woman approached the lectern. I have a couple of questions, she said, about the so-called legal immigrants. Here she gestured with scare quotes that had come to our city. She wanted to know how they'd been vetted, where they were living, who is heading up, watching over this situation. It's like 6 people in one house. Who's watching over it? Nobody. It's America. The council didn't have any information, Nix said, beyond the fact that the migrants were here legally. But Mary Deason, next at the mic, was not satisfied. My question is, if they're being bussed in here, and they're not, brought in here by vans, well, vans or buses, and it's not happening. Now, how come the city knows nothing about them? There are vans, so why doesn't the city know? Because 1, there aren't vans, and 2, if there were vans, why would the city know about them? Ms. Deason, with all due respect, Nix began, has anybody seen any bus coming in here dropping people off? Well, I hadn't, so Deason has to answer. I see why nothing gets done in this town. Then came Darrell Phillips, who found the council's attitude entirely unacceptable. Do we know where the individuals we're discussing are coming from, their point of origin? Because you're treating them like lawful U.S. citizens, which they are not. Okay, I'm going to cut this off, Nix said, because we have no reason to launch an investigation or to treat people differently because of how they look. Well, who said that? Phillips said. I didn't say that. Crosstalk erupted. Nix, who is the only black person on this council, and Councilwoman Heath started arguing. Heath is the one who went on Fox News. Phillips kept going. Haiti is a failed state, he said. There's no way the State Department can vet these individuals. It was at this point that a man from the audience walked up and planted himself next to Phillips, crossing his arms and glowering at Nix. A woman shouted at her, "You shut up and let people talk." Nix later told me that the footage from the event didn't capture the scope of the scene. Just out of frame were more people who'd stood up from the audience, arms crossed and glares set, something she interpreted as a show of force. Nix asked everyone to leave. The meeting was over. Good to know they don't want to hear the truth, one resident said. Nix had a police officer escort her to her car. The clips went viral on TikTok. Within days, Phillips was on Fox News. Alabama resident reacts to totalitarian council president disbanding meeting over migrant questions. The headline on the accompanying article read. Over the next 2 weeks, officials pieced together what information they could. Between 25 and 60 Haitian migrants were living in Sylacauga. The school system had just one new enrollee. Many of the migrants had found jobs through staffing agencies, settling into 3-month roles with auto manufacturing plants outside town. A number had already moved out to a motel near Alexander City for an easier commute. So, doing normal things. Even moving closer to their jobs as normal people might. According to officials, many of the migrants numbered among the 210,000 Haitian nationals who have entered the U.S. since January 2023 under the Biden administration's parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. Parolees can live and work in the U.S. for up to 2 years. Then they have to go, I guess, but up to 2 years, I don't know, with the support of a U.S.-based sponsor who agrees to help with housing, health care, and other needs for the duration of their stay. The program was suspended for much of the summer after federal investigators found signs of fraud. Thousands of so-called serial sponsors, 24 of whom had applied with Social Security numbers belonging to dead people. So, bad news, right? So suspend the program. That seems like a reasonable response. Facts about the Haitians in Sylacauga were parceled out by officials in subsequent city council meetings. Yet, they were things the local officials just didn't know, or there were things that they just didn't know, including who the migrant sponsors were and how to make sure that they were fulfilling their obligations. For some residents, including church leaders, the push for answers sprang from genuine concerns about labor trafficking. They have to arise if you just can't figure out what people are doing, right? Following a late 2022 report that auto plants in rural Alabama were employing children, many of whom were migrants, the Department of Labor filed suit earlier this year against 3 Alabama companies for violating federal child labor laws. Others saw the absence of information, though, as more proof that the government was abetting the invasion so clearly underway. No concern for, their local business leaders, the pillars of their community exploiting child labor, migrant child labor at that. That's not the issue. For the conspiracy-minded, vindication came with the collision of two events. The first was the arrest of one O-N-E migrant outside that house on South Main on September 8th for allegations of domestic violence, which was seized on by people who were already arguing that the Haitians were corrupting the town. There was no domestic violence anywhere in Sylacauga, Alabama ever, I'm sure, before this. The second was the vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance and then Donald Trump spreading the baseless conspiracy theory that Haitians were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. Taken together, well, you can see the disaster coming. Virtually every Republican official in Alabama seemed to want a piece of the Springfield conspiracy. They, too, had Haitians in their communities, and they, too, were supposedly facing a crisis. This sudden surge of people, the one student, for instance, has created safety, health, infrastructure, and economic concern for residences. Residences, that's what it says. Not residents, but residences. Who's that dummy? It's Senator Tommy Tuberville, who wrote to the Secretary of Homeland Security about it. This situation is simply untenable. That one new student. The lieutenant governor wrote his own letter to DHS falsely claiming that the HIV rate is soaring. He's too stuck in the 1980s when HIV was something that they associated with Haitians at the time. And this happening as a result of illegal aliens, which it wasn't. On September 19th, Alabama's Attorney General traveled to Sylacauga to offer assistance. It was embarrassing, Mayor Hagel told me. He met with our county's task force. He met with the sheriffs. He met with all our police investigators, everything. And he could not find anything wrong. And yet, that very evening, Sylacauga was on primetime Fox. Laura Ingraham featuring the small town as the latest, quote, target of the Biden administration's open borders agenda. She rolled clips from the latest city council meeting, the one where everybody went crazy, featuring a resident's protest that his rights were being trampled on. She warned Americans to pay attention. This is a flood of humanity, and it will be at your doorstep soon. Then she offered a definitive explanation for what was happening. Sylacauga is Trump country, and they aren't fans of DEI programs, which has nothing whatsoever to do with any of this, of course. They don't believe much in gender fluidity. Has nothing to do with this, of course. And they do respect and support law enforcement, except when they have to storm the Capitol or whatever. And we know what Kamala Harris thinks of people like that, Ingram said. It's all a form of punishment. Lost in all this were the Haitians themselves. Throughout my week in Sylacauga, I tried to speak with them. Eventually, the 6 I met at Sylacauga First Baptist Church, men who ranged in age from their mid-20s to their 50s, agreed to talk, but only if I didn't publish their names, because they didn't want to draw any more attention to themselves. They spoke only Haitian Creole, so we communicated through a translator. They told me they'd gone to a Protestant church back in Haiti and had been glad to find one here. What do you know? Finding one in Alabama. Rick Patrick, the church's lead pastor, and Trip Dixon, the family pastor, told me they've been trying to learn more about the new congregants. They wanted to know how the church could help ease their transition. They could speak up and defend them, you know. That would be one thing. One Sunday, Dixon had invited them to his office after the service, but it was difficult to convey all that to people who didn't speak the same language. Finally, one of the migrants responded with some of the few English words he did know: God is good. And I think you would think they could agree on all of that. Ingram's theory of punishment validated what many residents had long suspected, at times even seemed to want to be true, that Sylacauga was the express target of some undisclosed plan from on high. There was order in conspiracy. The notion that the migrants' arrival might simply be a function of the scattered and banal physics of human life. A guy knew a guy who knew some guys who were hiring. Well, that's all too untidy to entertain. But, in fact, there was a guy. His name, by all accounts, was Fred. So much attention had been paid at this point by national news outlets and state and local officials to the fears and concerns of Sylacauga locals, but strikingly little was known about the experience of the people who'd come from so far away to wind up in that small town. Fred seemed like he might be the key to their story. I heard about Fred within an hour of arriving in Sylacauga. Among city officials and local pastors, Fred had achieved mythic status. The First Baptist pastors and their local leaders used the word controller to describe his relationship with the Haitians. As they understood it, Fred, who was Haitian, was the one who'd fetched many of the migrants from Florida and brought them to Sylacauga. Fred was the one who had arranged for as many as 20 migrants to live in that house on South Main. That's a lot of people, but in one house, but not for a town. Fred had set them up with the staffing agencies. Fred had been transporting them the 45 minutes to the auto plants and back. The officials worried that the Haitians were being taken advantage of by Fred, upcharged for their rent and rides and possibly even the staffing agencies. In my mind, it's exploitation, State Representative Ben Robbins told me, and that's a genuine worry, but I don't know if that's how he came to it. But none of those officials had ever been able to locate Fred. All they knew from the migrants was that he did not live in the South Main house himself. Was Fred renting the house? Subletting it from someone else? Was that person a sponsor? Was Fred a sponsor? Was he working for the staffing agencies? An under-the-table headhunter for cheap labor? Was Fred even his real name? We don't know. Trying to confirm even basic information felt like twisting a Rubik's Cube, beginning with the house. The duplex is owned by a nesting doll of LLCs. You can't have that, right? The registered agent for the ultimate holding company is an attorney in Birmingham. The house has changed hands in August. It had previously been owned by a real estate investor with dozens of properties in the county. When I called the number associated with this person, the man who answered said he would help if he could, but he'd retired to Florida and had memory problems. But apparently, if he's a white guy, he's off the hook, I guess. My search queries online became more and more baroque and still turned up nothing. One staffing agency seemed genuinely bewildered by my questions. Another kindly referred me to their legal department. It occurred to me that Fred might not actually exist. And then, on my 5th day in Silicaga, while wrapping up what seemed to be another dead-end conversation, I was slipped a Post-it note with a name on it. 3 days later, I was on the phone with Friede, I guess F-R-I-D-E, Friede Cyrus, a 46-year-old Haitian migrant. Cyrus told me he'd arrived in the U.S. in 2019. He'd lived mostly in Florida until January when a friend told him about a job at a poultry processor in a small Alabama city called Enterprise. By spring, he'd relocated to Talladega County, where a friend of a friend had reported openings at an auto plant. His search for housing, he explained, led him to a Hispanic man who oversaw multiple houses for a boss of some kind. This is how he came to rent the duplex in Silicaga, as well as other properties in town, including his own residence. And guess what happened? He knew people, and he was asked by the people who employed him whether he knew any more people who wanted work. He said, yeah, sure. Lots of Haitians need work. And he went and he contacted them and he picked them up and he drove them into town and he gave them a place to stay and gave them jobs. Isn't that crazy? What an invasion.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
So, of course, all these people are convinced that Joe Biden arranged this whole thing himself in order to something, and they were all going to vote, and none of them are registered to vote, and they're going to overwhelm the system even though there's only one new student, and yada, 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 on and on and on. This has been happening over and over again in different contexts. They still believe it. You can't stop it. We'll see you tomorrow.